So in this video, I want to talk about Samarkand. Samarkand, I imagine most people have heard of it. Most people who are familiar with Uzbekistan. It's the second largest city in Uzbekistan, and it's fairly popular with tourism. Registan is there, of course, and a lot of the images you see when you just sort of Google it are from places like that. So another thing most people might be familiar with if they have a sort of a reasonable knowledge is that there is a high-speed train between the two. The train does leave, I want to say like 4 or 5 times in the morning and then comes back in the evening. You can take trains in between that time, but they're slower. They're like 3 or 4 hours. The price for just like a basic seat is about $10, and then for business class it's like 15. Coincidentally, you can actually fly for about the same price as well. If you do fly, like I said in a previous video, it's out of their domestic terminal, and then if you take the train, it's out of their main station here, and it's got that sort of iconic Spanish-made blue trains, and they do go up to about 230 kilometers an hour. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it's faster than anything in Canada, that's for sure. So if you do go by train, it they'll drop you off here. This is the train station essentially, and there is one trolley bus for the whole city. There's obviously other buses and whatnot, but it actually runs from the train station all the way down to what I would conclude is sort of the touristy area. So it is quite convenient in that sense. I didn't take it, but I imagine it's very inexpensive, similar to other places. But I would consider this sort of area to be the touristy area. And some of the things like Registan here is one thing that I'll mention. And this whole street here is sort of a pedestrian only. And there's all sorts of different religious buildings, mausoleums, and stuff like that to look at in this area. I briefly want to discuss my specific experience there, because the interesting sort of backstory is that when I was on the train, I was talking to the person next to me, and he spoke very good English, and I believe he studied abroad and whatnot. And we had a good conversation, but once the train arrived, we sort of parted ways. And then when I left the train station, it was sort of a typical taxi, and then there were people selling tours and stuff. And I was completely uninterested. I made that very clear. And in fact, I had to be the bad guy, and I had to say, like, look, stop. But they just kept following me. And eventually I ran into the guy who I was sitting next to on the train. And him being a local, I asked him, like, can you please tell these people to leave me alone? And as soon as I started talking to them, they sort of left. And he says, like, why don't you come with us? We're going to go see some sights. And I said, sure. And he was the most hospitable person because he provided the transportation with him and his other two guests who he was with. We had to pay to get into certain places, and he paid for it. We went to lunch, and he picked up the tab for lunch. Just incredibly hospitable person. He gave me his contact info. He says, if you ever have any problems while you're in the country, just let me know. And it really just speaks to how great, how hospitable the people were in my view. And so that's how I came across some of these places. But otherwise, they are relatively common, sort of popular things for tourists to do there. The first place we went to would be this mausoleum here, and I'm not going to struggle through some of the pronunciations of the buildings and the people who are in them and whatnot, but it's just the main point is that this is the resting place of multiple famous leaders throughout their time, and you get to see basically their sort of tiled or stone coffins that they're in and whatnot, and you can hear about the history and whatnot. I actually asked the person who was showing me around and sort of said, like, do you relate to this? Do you identify with this? Because Uzbekistan has such a long history with different rulers and whatnot that I got the impression there wasn't a single sort of identity that people could get around. And he did admit that, these people are, from such a ancient time. I think it was only like 600 or 700 years ago, but still a long time ago. That no, it was more of just sort of written history and interesting in that sense, but nothing that they were sort of passionate about or anything like that. But the building was very old, and there was a number of things to look at because it had damaged either during some sort of fighting or an earthquake or something like that, and you can see where they had picked up, and you can see the older parts of the building. And of course, they had tons of things that you can buy. There was even a Stalin throw that you could buy. I talked to my wife. She wasn't terribly thrilled with me bringing that home, so we had to leave it there. But no shortage of things to buy, things to take a look at there. And like I said, there's a small fee to get in. I don't know what it was exactly, but I imagine it's around $1 or $2. So the main attraction is Registan, which is sort of a main square that's been there for a long time with the iconic blue or turquoise, whatever you want to call that. And obviously, if there's one thing you do, it would be to go there. The three buildings are actually they all look sort of similar, but two of them were built in the 1600s, and the first one was built in the 1400s. There is a small fee to go inside, unlike in Bukhara. But like in Bukhara, yeah, it's sort of now filled with sort of things that you can buy, tourist type things, as well as textiles and other clothing and whatnot. But it's obviously it's popular. When I was there, they even had like a wedding where they were taking photos afterwards, and then it's all sort of part of a sort of pedestrian walkway where you can go up and see other similar buildings. To be honest, like I only spent the day there in Samarkand. I took the train down in the morning and then just took the train back in the evening. And some people had remarked that you need more time there and whatnot. But after being in Bukhara and sort of seeing similar things, I felt that a solid day was a good enough for me. But yeah, this here I think is sort of what people think of when they think of Uzbekistan, and it is nice to walk around.
باقي شو أفضل زي هما ولا ما جربت تريم بالتمر
Еще и отпускают почти на грех не отпустить момент.
But some period of time, he will have big show, animated, visualization. Everybody sits here, outside. There's really beautiful picture. This is, I'll read you by
As the day sort of wound down, I ended up taking a cab back to the train station. However, I kind of regretted it because it was very difficult to get a cab, and there was a big language barrier. I was pointing to a location near the train station because I was going to be let off early and walk the rest of the way so I could get some things for the train ride. And yet, without a specific destination, the driver was just really confused. And eventually, I just told him to take me to the train station. But the whole thing was sort of like a 10-minute ordeal where he was calling over other people and stuff. And I assumed I should have just taken the public transportation back. It would have been next to nothing, and I would have been able to see just as much and not have to communicate with anyone. But anyway, I have other videos on Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. Feel free to check them out. Hopefully you enjoyed it.